Guys. All right. I'd like to welcome everybody to today's version of Noisy Reality. It's January 20th, and we're very pleased to have with us today the Washington Bureau Chief of the Danish Broadcasting Corporation here today with us, Kim Bildsøe Lassen. And we're going to talk about Greenland, this whole situation. Now, Kim, thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me.
Well, first of all, Kim, just explain to us your take on this because it is complete insanity to even have this discussion. But I'm taking it seriously because, some of us, of course, view what's going on in the United States as a form of insanity too right now. So I don't put anything past Mr. Trump to do something. But you explain to me how you see this. How do you see this going on?
Certainly, Jim. And I just want to, before we get into it, I just want to say that, I'm a journalist and I work for the Danish Broadcasting Corporation, and we have sort of very high standards of neutrality. So what I'm going to do tonight is I will be happy to explain. I will be happy to put forward the views of the Danish government, the Greenlandic government, the people of Denmark, the people of Greenland. My own sort of private thoughts I will keep to myself.
Please.
I will discuss that with my wife and my children.
Got it.
But that's the way that I like to operate. But just to get back to the question, I mean, this idea of taking over Greenland, we heard it the first time from Donald Trump during the first term. In 2019, he mentioned it, that was something that he could foresee as a good idea that would enhance American security. And we all sort of looked at each other and thought that was odd. And the Americans that I spoke to sort of had the same feeling that was probably something the president said and not really being serious about it, because the idea of taking over territory from another NATO country was sort of seemed a little odd. Now, when Trump then came back into office a year ago, he mentioned this idea again, and he has been saying it constantly, in spite of a lot of people sort of telling him maybe it doesn't make so much sense. He has been continuously saying that we, the Americans, need control over Greenland. We need to own Greenland. Greenland needs to become part of the U.S. in order for us to, for security reasons. And what, Jim, I think is very important to understand is that there has been military cooperation between Denmark, Greenland, and U.S. since, long before the Second World War, and certainly during the Second World War. And in 1951, we made a treaty together that said that, the U.S. can have as many troops and as many bases on Greenland as it basically wants. We in Denmark or Greenlanders are not going to say you cannot do that. We want to be informed. We want to have discussions with you, but we accommodate you militarily the way that you want to. The Americans then chose, because they considered, as we did in Northern Europe, the Arctic to be a low tension military area. So the Americans withdrew all their troops. At that point, back in the 50s, there were 15,000 troops there. Today, there's 150. Back then, there was 18 bases. Now there's one. And that is something the Americans have done, not something the Danes asked them to do, not something Greenland asked them to do, not something NATO asked them to do. So that's the status. That's where we are. And then this thing has arisen, and for most people in Europe, as I think you can see on the reactions, and certainly people in Denmark and Greenland, there is sort of a bewilderment about what is this all about? Because militarily, it doesn't really make a lot of sense. And the idea that you would be willing to sacrifice the probably most successful defense alliance that has existed in the world in order to obtain what? That is puzzling a lot of people.
No, I was going to say something rather emphatic about that, but okay. Well, let's go back into the relationship with Denmark and particularly Greenland. Now, we know that during the war, as you mentioned, and before the war, um, Greenland was looked on strategically as important simply because of its location in the Greenland, UK, Iceland gap, the whole question of the bottleneck of the Atlantic entering, and that was the Bismarck battleship in 1941 infiltrating through one of the aspects of it, and then also the Cold War. And then you mentioned, of course, these bases. When I was a boy, I watched The Big Picture, which was a propaganda TV show done by the U.S. Army, and they had a whole half hour on the building of the base at Thule. Uh,
Mhm.
so just explain a little bit more about that, and also this question of the Danish government being approached to purchase Greenland after the Second World War. I believe Truman put that forth as a
Yes.
position. So just explain a little bit about what you can shed light on that issue.
I mean, let me begin just by saying that Denmark and the U.S. has had a continuous relationship, diplomatic relationship, for 225 years. It is the longest diplomatic relationship nonstop that you have with any country, and I think Danes feel very connected to the US. I did that as a boy. I did that growing up. I moved to the US and served as a bureau chief here for the first time during, during 9/11, which was sort of a profoundly, I mean, it was a situation that touched us as a people. Denmark, you know, sent soldiers when they were asked to Afghanistan.
Right. I think,
We
and one thing, Kim, I think I'd like you to just right there mention to the audience is as I understand it, the contribution of Denmark to the global war on terror, if you will, was disproportionate of any country in the world. Is that correct? Am I
that
wrong?
is absolute no, that is absolutely correct. I mean, we had many casualties in Afghanistan. We also sent troops to Iraq, and this was debated in Denmark. I mean, um, but there was a sense, and it was certainly the opinion of the Danish government, that when an ally like the US asks us for help, we will give that help, because that's how this understanding, the NATO agreement, I mean, the idea of being allies, that's what it's all about. We went to Liberia. We've sent troops many places, and that's one part of it. Like you say, there was an idea back, and Truman asked, was Greenland for sale? It was very quickly done because the Danish government said, no, it is not. Um, and I think you have to understand that right now there is this feeling that even if Denmark wanted to sell, you cannot I mean, you can sell medicine, and you can sell boots, and you can sell cars, and all kind of other stuff, but we cannot sell people if the people don't ask to be sold. I mean, we are in 2026. So when I mean, this is a decision that is for the Greenlanders to decide. And they have very clearly said, we want to continue to be part of the Kingdom of Denmark. Maybe in the future they want something else. Who knows? But right now, that's where they stand. Very clearly, that's the position of the government. It is the position of, I think the latest poll showed 96% of the population feels this way. So it is, I mean, I don't even know how it would work that our prime minister would say and go, sold to the highest bidder. Now, the 27,000 people, the 57,000 people live in Greenland. There's another 17, 18,000 people living in Denmark, Greenlanders living in Denmark. I mean, how are we going to sell them? It is. I mean, it's not really clear how you would even go about that. I mean, if 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 people don't want to be sold, are we going to put them in shackles? And I don't know how that would even work. Um, so it's very unclear. Like you said, it was asked before, and at that time, then the Danish government said no, we cannot do that. Um, and that has been the position, and it's still the position. Like our foreign minister said when he was here, you can trade groceries and you could trade all kinds of stuff. You cannot trade people.
Now, as I understand it, there's also treaties that exist between Denmark and people in Greenland about self-determination for Greenland. Could you explain that?
Yes. Well, I mean, and I will also be very clear, the history of the relationship between Denmark and Greenland has dark chapters. I mean, we were a colonial power, but we were colonists in Greenland, and we have done our fair share of mistakes, whether it would be forcefully moving people to the cities, whether it would be force them to speak Danish instead of Greenlandic, and other things. There has certainly been a lot of mistakes, and the Greenlanders have complained about certain mistakes. They have got they have their own history, which has been in some points been um, been badly shaped by the fact that the Danes were there. Today, the way it is that they have self rule, so they have their own government. They have their certain areas, whether it would be policing or schooling, things like that, that is completely determined by Greenland itself. And then there are other areas, for instance, foreign policy, defense policy, where it's done in cooperation with Denmark. And then Denmark is paying a certain amount of money to help the Greenlandic society, because they basically have the same rights for um, free education, free healthcare as other citizens in Denmark.
So it's my understanding in 2019 is when this whole issue began to be raised by Donald Trump. Is that correct? Is
Yeah,
that your understanding? And I
yeah.
understand that he mentioned this when the prime minister was here in the United States. Is that also correct?
Well, it was a little unclear how he mentioned it at that point, but he said something. But that was at that point, it was actually more or less taken as a joke, not really something that was taken serious.
Do you have any knowledge as to how he even got into this issue as something to bring up in 2019, or do we have any clear idea about that?
I don't know, but journalists from New York Times who interviewed him, um,
You're talking about the recent interview, right?
yes,
Uh-huh.
they said that at one point he looked at a map, um, and he saw this big piece of land laying there next to the US. And then he said, why is that not American? Why does that belong to somebody else? And then he started, this thing he's saying about he doesn't understand why Denmark even claimed to be, or it belongs to Denmark because we had a boat there in 500 years ago. And then he says, we probably had a boat there as well. That is not really how history evolves, and I mean there are lots of boats going around, but that doesn't mean you always claim territory. This is a part of a larger historic event.
Right. So, oh, I didn't hear that one. That there was a vessel. When did he say this happened? In the 18th century or the 19th
Well,
century?
he's said sometimes he says 200 years ago, sometimes he says 500
Yeah.
years ago.
I see. I see.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Well, I know the Americans weren't sailing around Greenland when the Vikings were there. But anyway, uh, so
No, and without being sarcastic, he says that you cannot claim land just because you come sailing in a boat. And I sort of said, okay, well, how does this country, get started? I mean, it's yeah.
Touche, as they say. Anyway, so yes, that's that's a good one. Now, what let's talk about the issue of raw materials because I will state my opinion about this. I personally think that what's motivating this is this bonanza that they imagine with the issue of global warming being ensuing, where all these, I mean, I read some study, I guess it was done by a think tank in Europe just recently about all the raw materials that lie in Greenland that can be exploited. And I wondered if you could verify, like, what's the story about that?
First of all, Greenland has always been, because it's this vast, vast landmass, and it's uninhabited, it's cold, it's beautiful. And I will say, if anybody who listens to this, if you want to spend the best week of your life, go to Greenland. It's the most amazing, beautiful place. It is majestic, and it's one of these places where you really feel, this thing that we often say, that you feel very small in nature, but there you really feel very, very small and insignificant. And maybe that's nice for us humans to sometimes get into that mindset. It's an amazing place, and it's amazing people who have lived there for so long. Now, because it's this vast area and because it's uninhabited, there has always been these rumors about whether it was gold, diamonds, now minerals, uranium, rare earth, whatever. And these discussions have been there for a long time, and lots of companies have went there, gone there, and tried to figure out what to do. The problem is, it is not a very friendly environment to do business when you terms of digging things. It is cold. It is a lot of ice. It is difficult to maneuver. And a lot of these companies who've tried have really been disappointed that it turned out to be either much more complicated than they thought, or the amount of minerals that you could find just wasn't as big as people imagined. Now, I have no doubt that there are opportunities in Greenland, but it takes a lot of investment. It will take a lot of ice to melt before these investments will really get a good return. So we have seen companies go up there, and then we've seen companies leave again. We have had different sorts of ideas about what could be done, but Greenland has not until now proven to be this big um, place where you could just find an enormous amount of stuff, whether it would be gold, diamonds, rare earth, whatever.
So the idea that it's going to be easy, like Sutter's Mill in California in 1849, is not necessarily there. And then another thing they raise is about the amount of fresh water that's in the glaciers there, that some argue, given the question of water, you got 20%. I saw some study that said that there's 20% of fresh water in the world in Greenland. So anyway, I just,
There will definitely be possibilities. I
yeah,
have no doubt about that.
right.
But it is it is not just something you go and get. It's complicated.
Gotcha. Now, when does this issue start to heat up? We're talking today on the anniversary, and I say that in quotes, of Trump being in office for a year. How does the timeline of this evolve during the year that Greenland becomes this issue that now we're seeing? The market crashed today, went down 850 points over these debates about Greenland. But how do you see how this timeline evolves?
I mean, if we look at this year, I mean, it started out with him mentioning it again, and that, of course, got a lot of attention.
When did that
And
happen? When did he,
That was just after he re-entered office.
when he came back?
I can't
Got it.
right
Okay.
now. I can't
Okay.
remember the exact date,
Got it.
but it was right after he had come back to the White House, and there was a lot of of people sort of looking for to figure out whether this was serious. Is this something that he will actually do? Is it something that he will remember? Is it something that he will, really pursue? And I remember sitting when he did his first um, uh, State of the Union address, and we were all sitting there. Look, will he say Greenland? Will he, talk about Greenland? And he didn't, and there was a sort of a sigh of relief from people in the Danish government, and their whole tactic for the first, I will say, 9 months, basically was to say nothing, do nothing. When we are asked about it, we say we will talk to our American friends about this, um, but not really engage in the conversation. And then what happened was the amount of sort of hints that Trump started, or the amount of just the amount of tweets that he put out there about Greenland started to grow immensely. And it was on all times of the day, and in the middle of the night, and it came to sort of a level where I think the Danish government felt that they had to sort of address it and tell people this is not really what happens. Also because it came to the point where there was also a political discussion within Denmark saying, okay, critique of the government for not doing anything, for not standing up to the Americans. In Greenland, we were starting to see people they're saying, what is this all about? And then Vance, the vice president, went to Greenland with Charlie Kirk, by the way. Um, he went up there. He was supposed to then visit Nuuk, but it was clear to them that that would be cause big demonstrations. So he actually only went to the Pacific base, Thule, which was the Thule base, which is now has another name, to visit the American troops there, but also there with an enormous critique of how Denmark had managed the defense of the Arctic.
Ah,
And then it has just grown and grown and grown until these last 2 weeks, where it's just been every day. And then we had the whole situation with our foreign minister and the Greenlandic foreign minister being here, meeting with Vance and with Rubio, coming out of that meeting saying, okay, we got a diplomatic track. They have agreed that we shall now enter serious high level discussions. And the next morning, Trump basically said, no way, I want it. And there's no other way. So there's nothing to talk about.
well, so let's look at what happened this weekend. I want to go back in time a little bit. You have this leak that supposedly Trump had a communication with with Norwegian Prime Minister that he was angry he didn't get the Nobel Peace Prize.
Yeah.
And and again, what I'm just trying to figure out, and some of course feel that this entire kerfluffle is interrelated to how the Epstein files has impacted on domestic politics because he knows that's the one issue that alienates his base, sort of unites everybody in consternation about not being able to see the data about that. And I wonder how you see that from the point of view of you being a journalist. I mean, is this indeed Steve Bannon flooding the zone or what?
That I really don't know. I mean, I don't know the why it has come to this. I can only look at sort of the facts, and there are many different uh, people have many different explanations. Fareed Zakaria from CNN says this is only about Trump wanting to make America great again in terms of landmass. I mean, he will be known as the president who incorporated the largest island in the world into the US, making the US physically a lot larger. And he basically wants sort of a real estate deal. Whether that is true, I don't know. I mean, I haven't seen any proof of it, but that is what some people are saying. Other people are saying it's a matter of basically getting into the history books and not so much about the size of Greenland, but the idea of acquiring something new or making a golden dome over that it would involve Greenland and so forth. I mean, I think being a journalist, one in this matter is one of the complicated things is that normally you can see a clear rationale between or for certain actions. It is very difficult to find a rationale for this idea of acquiring Greenland. Yes, I think there is a deep understanding in Denmark, in Greenland, in Europe for the need to beef up security in the Arctic region and also in Greenland. But that can be done easily without going into a process that might explode into the basically destroying NATO.
Right.
There is absolutely no need for this. So the logic is difficult to find when you look at it from sort of a perspective, and then then you go into this idea that you hear from some people in surrounding Trump that this is another way to end the European freeloading, as they call it, the idea that Europe hasn't paid enough to NATO and so forth. But again, if that leads to the destruction of the thing you're trying to say, that might not be the best way forward.
Yeah, no, that's a very good point because he's coming into the White House in Trump 1.0, and everything we know publicly and in the memoirs that have been written about the first administration, he is clearly hostile and dubious about NATO to start with. Multilateralism in general, he's hostile to. And then we see that this whole issue that he wants to boast about forcing the NATO countries to increase the amount of money they spend on defense spending. That's an interesting argument. Other arguments are that, of course, looking at how he's enriched himself personally with him and his cronies since he got into power, um, there's estimates that he's doubled or tripled his personal wealth. Well, here you have another situation where he could do that too, because you were, thinking this comes at the heels of this whole situation with Venezuela, basically vectoring the oil tankers of Venezuela and taking control of their exports and then vectoring it through banks in Qatar. I mean, it's who knows what he's up to with this. Um, but the question of the effect on Europe. Explain how you see that.
Well, I think Trump is looking at Europe, and I mean it has always been the policy of this Trump administration to somehow try to separate the European countries. I mean, Trump has always and been very vocal about his dislike of the European Union. He would much rather deal with Denmark individually, Holland individually, Germany individually, and so forth. And of course, that would be a lot easier. I think I talked to some of my colleagues in Brussels today, and I think there is a feeling that even among European leaders, there is this sense of, okay, this is too much. I mean, the idea that you will be threatened with tariffs if you don't give up territory among allies and among so-called friends, that seems a bit too much. And I think there is a feeling among some European leaders, at least, that if we give in to this, I mean, when are we ever going to be anything else than just subjects to Trump's sort of wishes list of what he wants to do? I mean, we're 1 year into his presidency. There's 3 years left. If we sort of accept that he will, put 200% tariffs on French wine because they don't support him on getting Greenland, then it is very difficult for anybody to plan or make sort of serious policy discussions without calling Washington and asking for permission. Because if this everything turns into a conflict, and I think there is a sense among many Europeans that this is where we got to confront what they consider the madness of this White House.
Right, exactly. And hopefully the people of this country will also respond, although I hold my breath. Um, let's bring other people on. Just raise your hands. Let me just bring you on. Alex, do you want to jump in with some question? Go on, Alex.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I just wonder, let me bring this up. So I found this today. Um, have you ever heard of this case, the East Greenland case, where actually, again, Norway occupied part of Greenland into the 30s, and there was a court decision by the Permanent Court of International Justice at The Hague in favor of Denmark acknowledging their sovereignty over the whole island. So it's been disputed for, at least for that period again. And it was, yeah, I guess
No, there's some.
Norway, yeah, into the
I
30s.
just want to add sort of a curious thing to this exact case, because you know that um, Trump has a couple of times said that the Danes have this idea that now they will beef up security, so they brought in an extra dock sled.
Oh, yeah,
Now,
yeah, yeah.
now the reason that this case in East Greenland came up was that the Norwegians were saying that the Danes aren't controlling this area. They aren't there. And what was then formed was this serious patrol, it is called, which is a very, I mean, these are specialized troops that travel by dog sled because that is the only way that you can travel around these areas. And that was basically to make sure that Danish soldiers did control all parts. Now, when this case was brought up, which was back in, yeah, I mean, I can't even recall. It was in 30s.
31, 33 here.
Yeah, you could. I mean, how would you get up there? The only way to get up there was by dog sled. That's the only way you can travel.
Yeah.
So that's actually the reason that this whole system was invented. And I mean,
Yeah,
I know that
find out
Trump
again
has.
because I'm a Napoleonic historian. Actually, this all dates back to a Napoleonic era treaty. The Treaty of Kiel in 1814. That made actually Norway, well, an independent kingdom for the first time. Broke it off
Exactly.
Denmark.
Yeah.
But again, because partly the treaty again didn't include, Greenland, Iceland, and Faroe Islands were actually given to Norway, I guess, at that time. So that's why there's this confusion. Essentially, I find it amusing that it goes all the way back to my period, essentially.
Yeah.
And actually, let's bring up the other, example in your history is of, essentially a bigger power bullying Denmark is, of course, again, what the British did in the Napoleonic era, twice to Copenhagen, where again,
Yes.
first, Admiral Nelson destroyed your navy in Copenhagen, but then a British army landed in Copenhagen, burned the city to the ground, essentially stole the Danish navy from Copenhagen.
Yeah, you're putting the knife in us.
Denmark became Napoleon's ally for the rest of the Napoleonic Wars, essentially in revenge. And actually, as I understand, took Danish privateers wound up, doing a lot of damage to the Royal Navy, essentially for the, yeah. So it's kind of an interesting example of, yeah, a big power bullying Denmark
Yeah.
back then. Yeah, I find it the parallels.
We were, of course. I mean, at one point we had Norway, we had Iceland, that was part of the Kingdom of Denmark as well. And but we are, as I say, I mean, we are a small country. We're 6.5
Yeah.
million people. There are 57,000 people living in Greenland, and another 17,000-18,000 Greenlanders living in Denmark. So I mean, we're a small country, and that's why
Right.
we have always existed on making allies and making friends and making sure that we would be part of the international community. That's also, I mean, people often ask, if, when they've been to Copenhagen, how come you guys always, we speak other languages. I speak sort of a decent English. I speak a decent German. I speak a decent Spanish. I speak a decent French. But that is because we're a small country. I mean, we had to rely on making friends.
Yeah. No, I can remember again, and Jim can reinforce a few other people on here again, those of us who, used to war game, NATO versus the Warsaw Pact, we can always remember again, you having, Denmark as, one of the important, forces, and that, Warsaw Pact was usually, again, the player would, try and knock out Denmark usually with some kind of amphibious or airborne operation against Copenhagen. That I can remember running a few times against some.
Well, I was I was once at a NATO conference in Garmisch where the division commander from Denmark was there with his staff, and we had a great time. But anyway, and
the Jutland division, which
it was actually a discussion on the Eastern Front, World War II, and the only staffs that weren't there were the Americans because we were expecting to go to war with the Iranians in 1987. But one thing I want to do before I get to Vincent is one of the cartoons that I've been particularly amused about is one talking about the health system in Denmark as opposed to the United States. And I just wondered if you could share with us what the social welfare system, the impact of social democracy on Denmark, and what kind of social benefit system exists for the Danish citizen as opposed to what you've seen in the United States in terms of, because if you've been here as a reporter, you've certainly seen the debate here about the health system in this country. We just went through the big, beautiful bill debate. So I mean, why would the Greenlanders give up being Danish citizens if they have? I mean, that was the thrust of the cartoon, that you have a robust health. What is the healthcare system in Denmark?
Well, the healthcare system in Denmark is basically, if you are ill, you get treated. I mean, there is no there.
No
We
copay,
have
none of that.
no. I mean, we have. I think a very very. Denmark has created a very decent society. And I will also say, when you compare it to the US, it's easier when you are a country of 6.5 million people. We are very homogenic. We have good education, free education. University is free, healthcare is free, and there is this idea that the true strength of a society is seen by how it treats its weakest members, and I think that has always been sort of the idea of this Scandinavian welfare model that was created, which in Denmark, Sweden, Norway, other places as well. And we pay a lot of taxes. And we do that, but I think people do that because they know that they get a system that provides for people's needs. I mean, it doesn't matter how poor you are. If you have cancer, you will be treated with world-class cancer treatment, and you will be treated as good as the king will be treated. I mean, that is the whole idea. And that basically works. We have some sort of private things, if you want to have a lot of physiotherapy, you can, pay for an additional insurance. If you want to jump the queue, you can sometimes pay a little extra and then you can jump the queue. But basically, um, you have you have a system that works for everybody. And I think just as important, and just as important when you talk about sort of the coherence of the Danish society, is that we have an educational system that is free. So everybody who wants to do it and has the ability will get a first class education, whether it's high school level, university level, master's level. Um, and that is actually one of the reasons that, for instance, a lot of American companies do business in Denmark, because they get a workforce that is extremely well educated.
Right. And I know Americans who decided to become Danish citizens. Vincent, go on, Vincent. Just have to unmute, Vincent.
It's an honor to listen to you and meet you. Thank you so much. So I'm 68 years old, and Aaron, my good friend, has explained to me that I was able to become educated. I have 2 master's degrees, and I was educated as an undergrad at Villanova University, and I actually went to Villanova with Bob, who became Pope Leo. So I've had a really good life, So being that I became educated and sophisticated, which all you gentlemen are, you know, this Trump, and I explain this to people every day, Make America Great came from Ronald Reagan. I have the poster in 1980. And Ronald Reagan started the whole conversation of NATO is ripping us off and we should get out of the UN. That was all started by really right-wing Republicans in 1980. So Trump, and I know this seems hard to understand, but when Trump was in school as a kid, in the 50s and early 60s, I was in public school, and the teachers would come and tell us every day that America won World War II, and that if it wasn't for us, all of Europe would be speaking German. And they especially, all the teachers in public schools really were very negative on France. They, the whole, so he came from the generation of, we won World War II. If they need to kiss our ass, and he just continues, like you mentioned before, logic. There is no logic to any of this. So I've been able to go from being lower middle class to doing well in life, but I still came from that world of look, most Americans don't know where Denmark is. They don't know the Dutch, the Danish. It's all the same to them. So he's really taken all those haters of Europe, and it's been going on for 50 years that they didn't pay us back for World War II. If it wasn't for us, they'd all be speaking German. This idea that that French hate Americans. It's all wrapped up in the same, the same, it's wrapped up in the same ideology. It's like, nobody helped us. We had to be the policemen of the world. And it's not a sophisticated conversation. I got that. But he's got a lot of, 50% of the people in this country voted for him. And that's why, because he just has had the same message that's been going on for 50 years in the United States, that the Europeans have been ripping us off. They never paid back their war debts. I mean, could you imagine when I was a kid in fourth and fifth grade, the teachers would say, "Oh, well, Europeans never paid us back. They still owe us money from World War II, which is not true. The only country they ever had anything good to say about was, Great Britain because of Winston Churchill. But other than that, it's and it's just the 60-year extension of all that hating of Europe. And
But
that's why he gets away with it. And I'm not defending him. I'm just telling you what it's really like amongst these, people that are some of my relatives. Like I
no,
can't even talk to them.
but Vincent, I completely agree with you. And when I travel around this country, I mean, I could tell you a lot of stories about how many Americans do not know so much about where Denmark is. And I had a recently I was this was in Kentucky, and I was standing with my cameraman, and these two young guys came over and asked where I was from, and I said, we're from Denmark. And there was all this television equipment lying on the uh, on the ground, and they looked at the person and said, in Denmark, do you guys have electricity?
Yeah,
And he was
but
like,
don't think
but
it's only in Kentucky. It's in the
no,
suburbs of New York.
I know that, and I'm just going about what I was then going to say. Also, to your point, Vincent, is that I mean, I think it's pretty obvious that and this goes for all countries basically. When you have groups that are when they feel the pressure, as a lot of people feel in this country, you got to find somebody who to blame, and then you can blame, as a lot of places that happens also in Denmark. You blame either an immigrant community, or you blame the Germans, as we did just after the Second World War, or other peoples that we will find to blame. And in this case, I mean, you there are fair amount of people who always, I mean, who looks at Europe and say we are weak, and basically, for me, what I often try to explain to my audience back home is that a lot of the things that we really appreciate, that we really find things of great value, whether it be the way we eat, whether it be the type of landscape or housing you want to create, or whether it's what you value in life. I mean, the whole life work balance that we talk so much about in Scandinavia. When I explain that to my American friends, they say, "Isn't that just another word for being lazy?" You know, and 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 I can see where they come from. I mean, it's just two very different ways of looking at life. I mean, um, my wife often says to me that when you're here, and that is part of this country's strength. It is almost everything is about money. Almost everything is about money, and that is not that has never really been the same. You have it a little in Great Britain, but in other European countries, you don't feel that everything is about money. There's a lot of things about money, but there's also a lot of other stuff.
Mm.
And if you only look at, how much do I take home? When can I get a new car? When can I get a new television? And it doesn't go as quick as you want. You find somebody to blame, and of course you can blame Europeans. But this is not going to be solved by taking Greenland.
But
I
I
mean,
just want you to know this this rhetoric has been around for at least 50 years. You know that.
oh,
It's,
yeah, yeah, yeah,
I
yeah.
mean, I can't sell you what, I was in Germany, in Heidelberg, when I was in the service, and, it, the people that like are the workers of our country that are not educated and not sophisticated, we've had generations of brainwashing of how Europe has ripped us off and sucked all the money out of us. And I know I'm repeating myself, but they go on and on and on. I mean, you're probably not aware that in the news media in the United States, the right-wing news media is starting to say that Denmark has mistreated the indigenous people of Greenland, and they sterilized women for like 20 or 30 years, and they treated them like second-class citizens, and they're interviewing all these indigenous people saying that Denmark treated them like second, and now the right-wing MAGA people are like, yeah, we want to help those people.
Wow.
Yeah.
I mean,
and I will say, I mean, they actually do have a point, but like I said initially, there are dark chapters in the relationship between Denmark and Greenland. And there was a case of mass sterilization, and there has been mistreatment. And so no doubt about that. But I guess,
like,
I mean,
we haven't
if I may be
mistreated
so,
our Native Americans.
Right, exactly. Look at our own history.
but I was just about to say, if we're looking for mistreatment of indigenous people, you can also find that here in this country.
Oh no, yeah, bury my heart at Wounded Knee. I know.
Mm.
Right. Anyway, yeah, we'll come back.
Thanks for
We'll
listening.
come back, Vincent. Michael, go on, Michael. Mike, go on. You have to unmute. Yeah.
Yeah, I just had to unmute. Yeah. Okay. Well, first of all, I just wanted to say that there was an exception to American, for lack of a better term, stupidity, which was that in the when the generation who served in World War II, I was always brought up to know that America did not win World War II by itself. And I think any veteran who served front line would have, and
Breaking up, Michael.
and most of them taught it, but we don't have those terms anymore. I mean,
You're breaking up, Mike. Michael, you're breaking up.
Let me get to a better spot here. But the fact of the matter is, we have, again, people, in other words, America's been called the stupidest democracy in the world, or certainly one of them. And we have probably the most simple-minded administration, to put it mildly, that we've ever had. But whether it's a president going through a consistent psychotic break, or whether he just has no capacity to learn, or whatever the reason, or that he's an asset of another country, another power, the question becomes, what do we do about this? In other words, how do we stop this? I know I'm moving the conversation to a different direction, but I would like to know.
He can't do anything.
No, but Mike, I just want to say, I mean, this is really where I go into my journalistic mode and say that is not for me to say. I mean, I'm happy to describe, but that is a conversation that you guys have to have between yourselves and other actors around the world, and maybe also in Denmark and Greenland. But that is not for me to say.
No, but if we look at it just somewhat journalistically, as to analyze it, maybe I should phrase it as, what could be done? What can be done about this situation to prevent it from, or what has been done in the past, or what are the potentialities of what can be done?
I mean, I know what the Danish government hope is that the meeting between the Danish foreign minister and the Greenlandic foreign minister with Vance and Rubio earlier this week. No, it was late last week. I work.
It's a blur.
Yeah. But their hope was that you could get into some sort of high-level discussions, finding a compromise, whereas you can discuss security, you can discuss development of new bases, more American troops, if that's what they want, or maybe have a NATO mission in Greenland as you see they have in the Baltics, a permanent NATO mission that will actually consist of soldiers from Greenland, Denmark, and other European countries, maybe Canada, maybe the US, so that you have a military system that will um, solve the issues that the Americans say are here. The Danes basically are saying, we will discuss anything with the Americans. The only thing we cannot discuss is ownership of land and ownership of people. That's a no-go, because we simply cannot do that. First of all, it would require a referendum in Denmark and in Greenland, which would be a thundering no. So even if you had a politician saying, okay, I try to save Denmark here, let's say we sell it and you can have it for $10 million or whatever, you couldn't do it. I mean, we'd have to have a referendum and people would say no, as long as the Greenlanders say no. So what they're looking for is some sort of compromise. And I think also, to be realistic, they also know it has to be a compromise that doesn't look like a defeat for the American administration, because that's not going to be accepted in the White House. So you have to find a compromise that looks like Trump has won something, and the only thing he cannot win, because that is not possible, is the ownership of Greenland. And if that compromise, maybe, and nobody knows if it's there, but that is certainly what the Danish government and the European governments, whether it be France, Great Britain, Germany, Sweden, Norway, you can go on, that is what they see as the potential outcome of this conflict that will not crush NATO and will not crush the transatlantic cooperation.
So in other words, how to deal with the 3-year-old child who happens to hold reins of power. Well, let me just say that one thing that I learned about Denmark when I was young is that, and that was based on what happened in 1943 when the Danish resistance, 90% of its Jewish population out within 72 hours of being forewarned of a Gestapo roundup. That indicated to me that Denmark had an amazing amount of resourcefulness. Danes were very resourceful, very quickly. So that, I would say, is good. Also, the higher level of education in Denmark and the low level of education. I'm not saying that Donald Trump didn't go to a good school. He just didn't get anything out of it. So the fact of the matter is that I do have hopes for Denmark being able to maneuver something with Trump. And since Trump is such a lousy poker player, it would be good to call his bluff and find out, to say, well, if you want more military bases, if you want these minerals, if you want this, and if you want that.
All right, Michael, you're really breaking up, man.
You're breaking.
And then, of course, something else. I am breaking up?
Yeah,
okay. Well, I'm not asking a question.
Terrible,
I was just going on,
signal,
so
man. Yeah.
cut me off.
But anyway, it's true that
Yes.
well, and that's true. I think that's something important that Michael raised there, is what happened in Denmark regarding the Jews. A lot of Americans don't know that story. Could you just relate that, Kim?
Well, it was like Michael just said. It was there was the word was around that the Gestapo was going to round up all the Jews in Denmark, and within 72 hours, I think it was 91% of them were secretly.
Nueva Jersey, obtenga un seguro médico económico.
They were transported secretly to Sweden.
Okay.
And saved.
Great.
Yeah.
Great. Okay.
And Jim, I mean, if we can just go on for a few more minutes, because then I've got to run.
Very good. And thank you for taking time. Aaron, go on, Aaron. Aaron, you have to unmute. For some reason, I'm not hearing you.
Yeah. It might be your microphone or your headphones, Aaron, maybe? Yeah, we're not hearing you. Maybe
we're not hearing you at all, Aaron.
Computer. Okay, yeah, now we're hearing.
Aaron, I'm not hearing him.
Oh, yeah. Oh, no, no, we're not. Yeah. It must be something with your computer, Aaron.
All right,
No, it was my earbuds.
because and keep in mind that why don't we just take all the comments and questions because
Yep.
Kim has to split. But go
Yeah.
on.
So Kim, I really appreciate you coming. I go almost every year to Denmark. I work from there. I work for some big technology multinationals over the years, Oracle and Cognizant, and I usually time it with going to the Copenhagen Jazz Festival and the Aarhus Jazz Festival in July.
Good on you. Good on you.
And I actually then go usually vacation in the on the Danish Riviera while all of you leave to go get baked in an oven in Barcelona or whatever. And then I'm sitting there with basically a bunch of grandparents taking care of kids and kids getting as lifeguards doing PhDs and masters. So I have this little Danish relationship there and I have a bunch of friends. So I really appreciate your time. Now, I'm wondering because I saw the combination of the Danish finance ministry and the sovereign wealth fund trying to organize certain moves. Which do you feel like there is the likelihood? Because I do think there's a nuclear option, and it's all financial, right? I think everything else, is window dressing and people doing performance theater in the street naked. I mean, I just don't think any of that has any value. I think at the end of the day, the value is, if there's a legitimate threat to sell U.S. assets, especially treasuries and stocks and derivatives, that has a huge, especially with the U.S. the having 18 of the 30 large systemic financial institutions, that forces a mark-to-market event. And now we're talking, really doesn't matter what Trump wants to do, right? Like this starts reshaping the financial architecture. Do you think there is an honest appetite in Denmark, and then more importantly amongst its core allies, especially especially the NB8, the Nordic Baltic 8, where you guys are synchronizing a lot more of your actions now? And do you see any NB8 kind of actions that are different than just the EU and throwing it at Brussels and going into the washing machine there?
All right, hold on. Let me, Lily, ask your question. Lily, just unmute. Lily? Lily?
I'm here. I apologize. Thank you.
All right.
My quick question was, well, I don't know if it's so quick, but I will throw it out there anyways. I wanted to know if he had heard, any kind of discussions about the PayPal mafia, so-called PayPal mafia, and whether that is, I heard that a lot of the Danish diplomats are thinking that that's what's really behind this, and I wanted to know what the gentleman's opinion was on that.
Oh, the tech bros, huh? Interesting. And you had another question, Lily?
No, that was it. I really just more
All right.
curious about on that issue alone.
All right, thank you, Alex, and we'll finish with you. Alex, you had a quick question?
Yeah, just to kind of response a bit to Mike, and just to what Aaron was saying, which again I agree with. We have to remember again that of course again requires a more Europe-wide response, which is of course again there are tens of thousands of American troops in Germany and Italy, and just restricting their ability to be deployed elsewhere, or essentially making an issue of it, or even bring up the idea of expelling them from Europe. If you do this, I think that would be something serious, that the Pentagon would step in and say you can't do this, because without Europe again we can't deploy to the Middle East, the US. So that would, and we wouldn't have anything in Africa either. So that would be, I think that's if you truly, again, like Aaron said, go nuclear again. I think
question.
Though that area is something, I don't know if the Denmark's government is thinking of that, but obviously again that requires the EU and NATO to be involved with that.
All right. Well, yeah. Okay. So let's stop it right there. Go on, Kim. Some easy questions.
Three questions. Let me take them in that order. You asked about funds and bonds, and very interestingly, there was a big pension fund for academics in Denmark, which is a rather large pension fund, they decided today to sell all their American bonds.
Wow.
And I don't have the number in my head, unfortunately. I would have to check that, but it's not going to rock the American economy as such. But if that really is something that will translate into other investors, that becomes an issue, like you say, Aaron. I mean, I completely agree with you. I think the only way really to turn this discussion around for Europe is if they go all in on the economy. I think that is basically the only way that Trump will accept what I said before, a compromise that somehow can be interpreted as not a defeat, but something that he can live with. Because if it suddenly comes to this, if it comes to that place where European investments are starting in big time to sell off American bonds, then the whole narrative changes. I completely agree. Whether that will happen, I don't know. But I have actually been surprised to see how strong the wordings have come out in terms of we gotta look at the economy. And like I say, you had this pension fund that went out and sold off American bonds today, and that is something to watch. I agree with you completely, Aaron. When it comes to the PayPal mafia, as you call them, tech bros, I mean, one of the big things that I think also has been puzzling for a lot of Europeans has been sort of there are laws in Europe which try to limit some ways the infraction that these companies can do on our everyday life.
Right.
And I think one of the reasons that these tech companies have been so heavily invested in Donald Trump is simply because that is a way to get rid of all these laws and systems that prevent them from owning everything. And it's come to the place where Donald Trump threatens to impose tariffs on countries that where the local judicial system has says these things are illegal. So it's very odd. You have a politician going in advocating for a private company to punish the local law system. So they are part of this story, but I don't think they are behind this as such. I think they're behind the whole idea of what the Trump presidency is about, but I don't see them necessarily have big involvement in this thing about Greenland and Denmark. And when it comes to NATO, Alex, you're completely right, and I think that is what makes it's so difficult to understand the logic of it. Is do you really want to get rid of NATO with all the possibilities it has, with all the things it does for American possibility to carry out its military ambitions in the world, to get something in Greenland that you can already get? Because the destruction of NATO will be tough for Europe, very tough, but it's not going to be without consequences for the US, because a US alone against China is a completely different story than the US and NATO and Western Europe against China.
Absolutely. Kim,
Yeah.
thank you so much. And listen, hopefully, this is a breaking story, as you know. Who knows what's going to happen in Davos on Thursday? We'd like to be able to call on you again in the next couple of days to come in and share your wisdom with us. Thank you so much.
Well, you're welcome, and have a great day, everybody. And thanks for listening in and for your concerns for our very small, but like I said, pretty decent society. Thank you.
Well, you gave us Hans Christian Andersen. What can I tell you? All
Thank
right.
you.
And other
Bye-bye.
things. Thank you.
Thank you so
Bravo.
much.